Well, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's always a real treat to come back. I've been back and forth over the years. I did do my first degree here. I was actually started off in Africa, then New Zealand, came to England late teens, did a degree, then decided I was actually a Kiwi and ended up back in New Zealand. But I do come back regularly. I've got family here, yeah, it's really good to be here and see you all. So 90 minutes is a reasonably long stretch. 50 minutes I can do pretty straightforwardly because that's what we do at the university, but even there you break it up a bit. So I'm going to work on a couple of themes, not everything that's necessarily in the paper, because once I realized it was 90, I thought, well, actually I'm going to have to bring in a few other things. We'll have, maybe could even break halfway for some questions, or just play it by ear, but hopefully you won't be nodding off. I haven't got the post-lunch, so we've got a little bit of opportunity that maybe your tummy's rumbling, it'll keep you awake as well. Can you hear me well enough at the back? Yes. Good, because one thing that people always tell me is that they can't hear me. Normally my husband tells me after I've been involved in a presentation, he said, well, I didn't hear a word of that. I said, well, thanks a lot, dear. So if you can't hear me, just raise your hands at the back and then we can make sure that happens. So in terms of what I'm going to cover, there's a few key areas around uncertainty, risk management, but a part of that I want to delve into the strategic management aspect because that's a real key to it. Scenario analysis, we did an exercise not dissimilar actually to the one that was done here in Britain a few years back to look at what some of those futures look like. And then also we've done a lot of work in terms of what is a resilient farm, how do you measure it, what is a resilient person, and then what are some of the strategies that the New Zealand farmers are adopting. So all of this, apart from, I will put a few little excerpts in here around the businesses that I'm involved in as a farmer, partly because it's a farmer audience and I know that that's the bit that probably resonates the most. But all of the rest of it is based on research that we've done. So either I've been part of the team doing it, or I have a master's student I'm supervising, or a PhD student I'm supervising. So what we're trying to do with this exercise, and it's been funded there, I notice put at the bottom there by the Primary Growth Partnership, it was a system that the government came up with where the industry put in money, they matched it, and we had 7 years to basically focus on farm business management capability for our particular part of that project. And so what we did is worked very hard with the students, with colleagues, across Massey and Lincoln to try and build that capability, but also to help people recognize what research looks like in this space. Because over the years, farm management research is quite poorly funded. And so you tend to have sort of short projects as opposed to real in-depth. Let's find out what is actually happening and what are people doing. And farm management research is all about you. Because when the farm management researchers all sat around and they said, well, what have we got in common? Well, different people had different aspects of the farm they were looking at, but fundamentally their fascination was you, the farmer. Because if we can understand as researchers what you do, why you do it, how you do it, that can then be shared with others, and that's how you basically build capability over time. So that's what we've done for the last 7 years, and most of this talk actually draws on different bits of that research over that time. So in terms of uncertainties, well, the one certainty in life is uncertainty. We know that, as are death and taxes, but uncertainty is part of what we live with. The graph on the side there is the graph that we all are familiar with in terms of the milk prices, halving and doubling over time. And that's just what we have to work within. It creates both opportunities and threats. And if one thing you pick up as we go through, certainly the area around the risk management, is actually about how quickly you identify opportunities and threats and act is part of how you manage risk. One of the things I've found over time is that whenever I've had well-meaning bureaucrats or anyone else saying, oh, we really need to teach farmers how to manage risk. And I look at them and I say, do you realize they've been managing risk since Adam was a cowboy? I mean, that's what you do. Every day you get up, you have no idea whether it will or won't rain, and if it does, whether it's what you wanted, whether you wanted it to this day as opposed to the next day after you've put the nitrogen on, or before you've done whatever, but you are managing risk all the time. So how you're managing risk is what we were delving into in the research to try and determine, well, what is it that you are actually doing? Because with these well-meaning people saying we need to fund things so that we can help farmers learn how to manage risk, we say no, let's look at how farmers are managing risk, learn from those who are managing it best, and then share that information through. So you are risk managers by default. Some of you might be more risk averse than others, but to be honest, many of you are entrepreneurs, which means you actually aren't fundamentally risk averse. You might be risk neutral. And that's the other so-called truism, all farmers are traditional and risk averse. Sorry, not in my observation over many years of farming. So we'll look at that. The other thing about you is it's also your perception of attitude to that risk that will determine actually what you see. So whether you see it as a threat or an opportunity, you'll be sitting at the table with someone and they'll look at the same risk in a totally different way. So it's all about your attitude and your perception of that risk that determines whether you see it as an opportunity or a threat. And then fundamentally, it's your capacity as a manager to interpret that risk and actually turn it into something that you capture for your business as an opportunity, or that you actually mitigate if it's a threat. So if we look at just some examples, now can you see that far enough back in the room from your various screens? Because I'll read if you can't. I don't tend to like reading slides, but I did sit further back and I saw some. So about 2/3 back, can you see the screens well enough? Good? Okay. So just to give an example, labour, we've just had a big session on labour. So, you know, is it a threat or is it an opportunity? I heard an awful lot of people sitting up the front here talking about it as an opportunity in terms of their businesses, but at the same time there were people seeing it as a threat. So how you actually capture those opportunities and what you recognise, and it might be that you end up with a superior workforce because you've captured those opportunities. You put in all the examples that we were given heaps of in the earlier session to ensure that you can actually have a superior workforce, because that's how you're going to capture that risk. On the other side, the loss of key employees, that's the exposure, that's a threat. So what do you put in place to actually mitigate that risk to make sure that those key employees don't leave? So you don't avoid looking at the threats, but you actually manage both to ensure that you can take your business forward. In the same way, finance could be things like attracting financing terms from the bank. That might mean that you have to be especially nice to your bank manager occasionally, and just make sure that you've got the information they require when they require it, that you're one step ahead of them in terms of your numbers, so that they know you're on top of your game. They have trust. They'll be comfortable to give you good terms. And then on the other side, the exposure is always that that banker might disappear, might end up, that bank might disappear. So you've always got that sort of worry around the loss of a lender at some point. So you might spread your risk going to various banks. I know the banks don't like it when you do that, but there'll be ways in which you actually manage that risk going forward. Business relationships, we talked about that a little bit around the staff side in the earlier session, but that's also about who you're buying from, who you're selling to, and is that a risk? Well, yes, it's always a risk. How do you actually turn it into an opportunity? Well, that's making sure that you manage those people well so that you can access those future opportunities. And at the same time, if there's a threat, it's then making sure that you mitigate that by perhaps ensuring that you are a key supplier. Just like the previous group talked about being a key purchaser of labour, or the type of farm that in our book, we talk about, well, if someone actually rings you saying, I want to work for you, then actually you've got your reputation out there in the right space, and that you're actually drawing people towards you. And that's the same in any other type of business. And the policy and regulation, looking at the threat and opportunity side, I had to put this one in. The potential on the policy and regulation was increasing market from more open trade. Wouldn't that be nice, given what the world's going through at the moment? But as that happens, yes, you can grab that opportunity and work with it. And the exposure then, the threat side more comes, and this is more of a European-centric one, change in farm income support. But in our book, it could be more around more government legislation in terms of what you can and can't do on farms. So it's just making sure that you're looking at both sides. So don't always just focus on that that right-hand side. Force yourself with every risk to say, how could I, what are the upsides in there? It's upside, downside risk. What's the upside risk? Most of the economists will tell you it's only ever downside because that's the only maths that they understand. But if you go into the middle, that's where the entrepreneurs and that's where the business people sit. So one of the exercises we put our farmers through is, I call it a brief survey. apparently it's not brief. It's only 2 pages, but you're given a list of uncertainties or risks. You're asked what is the impact of those risks on your farm, either positive or negative, and then what is the likelihood of that impact going to happen? And that's essentially what they call a heat map. So if you look to most traditional exercises in that, they will only look to the left-hand side, because you'll only have a heat map that looks at the negative impact of risk and the likelihood of it, and then you get a heat map there where obviously the higher the impact, the higher the likelihood, red, and down to the bottom corner where it's rare and very low. What we did though is we then said to farms, now turn the page and do exactly the same, looking at the risk from a positive upside risk. So from the upside risk, what are these uncertainties going to have in the way of impact, and what's the likelihood of them happening? And what we found straight away was working with all these various different farmers is that the majority of them actually are more upside than downside in their perception of risk. So that's, if you like, the glass half full, the glass half empty. This is one that my husband actually filled in. Now I can tell you immediately, well, you can tell almost from the lines there, he is a glass half empty person, I'm the glass half full person in our business. But collectively, I think we're more glass half full. But in his case, what we looked at, what we found here, is there a pointer on this one? No, that's all right. So if you look right to the middle of the arrow of attention, so once you've done this survey, you then say, okay, so do I worry madly about things like this one, very low impact, rare, or the ones that are really in the greens and the yellows? Not really, because if you're thinking about what should I be thinking about in my business, that's what the arrow of attention is all about. It forces you to look at that. So on the positive side, in the A was operations and business practices and global demand for farm products. So what this farmer was saying is, I see huge opportunity for our business in the whole sort of business practice side of things and what's happening in the world in terms of demand for our products. The world is crying out for protein. They like our protein, and this is, and our fats now actually. But that's really a potential to do something with the business. In the same way, the C, which is just sitting just in the red as well, there was a whole raft of things fell into that. He believed he could take opportunity out of pasture, crop and animal health, supply chains to market, ways in which we can do that better. Technology came through as a big one for all the New Zealand farmers when we surveyed them. And I've put including breeding. Now, it wasn't done necessarily for LIC, but it's there. Customer relationships and image. Availability of labour was seen as an opportunity. Skills and knowledge was seen as opportunities. So these are all things that, for this farmer's perspective, these are the things that he believed he could grab and take the business forward with. Now, on the flip side, on the negative, we've got climate variation. And I'll show you some nice photographs of how climate bashes our farm around shortly. And government laws and policies, local body laws and regulations. For New Zealand farmers, that's come right up to the top around negative or negative impact, huge likelihood of happening, and a real threat or a worry for many farmers. In number 3, which is still in the red, we had interest rates, credit availability, product and input prices, and availability of labour. So you can have availability of labour sat both in the threats and the opportunities, so, which is interesting because then you can actually see it. You say, well, there is an opportunity to make something here with labour, at the same time it's a threat, and that came up in the conversation earlier. So once you've got that area of attention determined for your farm, you can then say, okay, well, my objectives, my goals, my plans going forward absolutely have to focus on that arrow, picking up the upside and also mitigating the downside. So when we did this as an example of climate variation, I was here in June this year over in Ireland, actually, at an IFCN conference. And I normally ring my husband in the morning, because then he's in the evening, he's taken his boots off, he's a bit more relaxed. And I was just heading off to my conference, and I rang him up, and he was in a heck of a state. And what had happened is that the river that runs around our farm went through it. It's not the first time, it has. And 250 of our cows, silly old girls, he calls them here, decided to jump into the river and swim away. So he was in a bit of a state, but I did say to him, look, they float, you know, it's that wonderful methane belly they have. I rang the share milker, again, he was in a state, and I said, get a good night's sleep, because in the morning you'll be going back and forth up on the banks of that river, finding they'll be there, the cows will be there, but where they'll be is anybody's guess, but they'll be there. And so then I went into my conference sort of shaking and trying to concentrate on what I was supposed to be thinking about. And sure enough, the next morning they went down and you can't walk the banks because our river is, we've got a huge area of trees and shrub to you know, keep us well away from the water. But the local guy with the helicopter offered to take them up, and they buzzed up and down the river, and sure enough there were 10 girls here, another 20 there, another 30 here, and we got all but 20 back. And one actually went right down the river, under one bridge, under two bridges, and then hit the Manawatu River, turned right and went down another bridge, carried on down there, and she was halfway to Palmerston North, and then she scrambled ashore on somebody's farm, and they gave us a ring, and my husband went down to the truck and picked her up. So she'd have gone about 20K, I think, just bobbing along. So yeah, that's climate variation certainly. We've had floods on this river before. 2004, the whole farm went under pretty much and left us with a metre of sand, so we were starting farming from scratch on that bit of land. So these are just the risks that we face. And in the same way, again, I'm focusing on the negative, aren't I? So that's our farm from another angle with the water coming through. But then and that was us, a strong wind. So someone talked about winds from the east before and how nasty they are. Well, we get nasty winds from the east as well. And we had a wind from the east came along, and it decided to whip down the hills. There's a Ruahine Ranges up to the right there, came down the hills and picked up a 4-bay implement shed and threw it over the bank, and also took half the wool shed, which was interesting in itself. We thought, oh, that's fine, we'll go to the insurance. And they said, well, yeah, but you only need to replace half, because you've only lost half. And we said, well, the other half is 100 years old. And it's got, you know, old totara piles, and it's really anything but perfect. We'd like to just put the whole thing out and just build a new wool shed. No, but we can only reimburse you for half a wool shed. Anyway, this went on for 18 months. Luckily, we do have other wool sheds on the farm, but we finally won when they decided that the 4-bay implement shed didn't have to be replaced. We could put that money into doing the wool shed, so we got it done. But that was my son and a couple of others clambering around, picking up what they could from the top of the building. So those are all the negatives, but there are positives as well. We do have these positives. I mean, a lush autumn pasture brings smiles all round. You have years, we have this touchwood, very quickly. Our spring is looking good this year. We've had 2 shocking springs in a row where the milk production's gone like this, and then literally just about 2 weeks ago, it just leveled off. Now we're actually moving, we're actually getting a decent spring. Though my husband this morning said he's planted I don't know how many paddocks already, and there's been no rain now for the whole month. So I'm hoping we don't get a summer like you had last year. So, but that's just the reality. That's the climate. It's why climate is such a big thing. So go back to the population of all the farmers that we surveyed, and we normally send out about 2,000 surveys. We get sometimes up to 500 or 600 farmers responding back. It depends on the time of year. Depends on whether you can get a good database. But never ever send surveys out when farmers are calving. In fact, once you've missed calving, you've really missed it for that year. So there's a certain time when you need to get through. So this was the sort of the population at large. And again, you can see probably that for most of the farmers, for many of the farmers, there were more of a concentration into the positive there than there was the negative. And we drew that together, pulled to try and get a population description. The arrow for tension is very good for the individual, but it's hard when you're looking at a population. And then said, okay, well, let's look at it over the whole group that we looked at. What's the number one in terms of threats? So this is the negative, the downside risk. And for them, it was input prices and availability. So if you think for our pastoral farmers, inputs aren't huge, but they still matter. And so generally, input prices go up when there's less of it around, if I'm talking about feed. And not only might it go up, it might not even be available. So yes, you need to get some feed because there's a drought coming or whatever. So that is number one for them in terms of the threat. The next one was local body laws and regulations, and I've talked about that, and I mean, someone was talking before about already reading the Dairy Exporter. You'll be up with all the stuff that's going on there. So this is the local government, national government, and others all starting to have a much bigger say in what's going on the farm. The third one is global economic and political situation. So New Zealand, as you all know, exports 97% of our product. So what's happening within New Zealand matters in terms of the local government, in terms of what our landscape's like and what we're doing to our local environment. But from a trade point of view, it's what's happening everywhere else in the world that's most critical. So it's not surprising that the global economic and political situation is seen as a real threat, because anything could happen. And goodness gracious, since this survey was done, almost anything has happened in terms of what's, with Trump and all the various things that have been going on in terms of global trade. I listened to a guy from Singapore speak at a function I was at a couple of nights ago, and he was saying that the whole sort of the China-US thing and the impact that's having on Asia trade and where the businesses are developing and how they're trying to mitigate that risk and what they're believing will happen further down the track is really completely mind-boggling in terms of what we thought the normal global trade routes were of the past. So if you think of the China Belt and there's a term, forget it, Belt and Road that they're putting through, it's all about them being able to access broader markets, and there's no one going across to the US. It's all about the other markets that they're so focused on. So for us, that really matters. All of those countries are huge importers from us, and so that's a critical one. The next one is government laws and policies. So that's actually when you're then looking at, well, it's all very well, you might be able to get your local councillors in order, but how on earth you can get your national MPs in order when, again, they change every 3 years, and they can have quite a big impact on what's happening. So I've just been asked to join a freshwater leaders group that the government have put together, and their intent is actually out of this group to provide policy to the government around changes they might make in the freshwater space. And when they rang and asked me, I thought, that'll be a bit interesting. I wonder who, of course, most of the people in this group are the ardent, dairying is dreadful and we need to have fewer cows and we need to change all these different things. And I might be a little bit of a lone voice sitting on that group, but if I'm not there, who knows what might happen. So I think it's just important always to be there in those groups, and they will come up with some laws and they will override the regional councils because they have such a strong view around what our waterways should look like going forward. So there's always a threat there. Then you've got interest rates. Right down here you've got product prices. So even though we had all that massive volatility, halving and doubling of milk price I showed you right at the beginning, product prices actually comes below, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, it's 6, 7 on the list, which is interesting. So what's that saying? The farmers are saying the reality is that we have volatility in product prices. We can sort of manage that. It's still a threat, but actually this other stuff's far bigger in terms of the impact of us going forward as farmers. So then we said, okay, what's the flip side? What's the upside risk that these farmers are seeing? And number one is global supply and demand. So yes, they're worried to heck about the economics and the political situation going on around the world, but they're just looking at the global supply and demand and saying that's absolutely the biggest opportunity going forward. So that's the world saying, yes, we want protein, we want dairy, we want actually dairy protein and dairy fat. We want, as we're growing wealthier, we actually require more of this the type of food that we produce, but also the world's becoming so much more specific in terms of, well, now it might be that it's pasture-fed, that it might be organic. A number of people have spoken already who talk about organic. It might be that it's, the animals are allowed to be free range. There's a whole raft of things that consumers are starting to be quite specific about, and the farmers are just seeing those as number one opportunity. Product prices, they see as opportunity. So that's interesting. Yes, there's massive volatility, but that volatility has actually resulted in a higher average than what we ever used to have before. So yes, our milk price has gone up, but our volatility's gone up 140%, but the milk price has also gone up, I think it was about 50 or 60%. So they see the product prices as staying strong, and this year the product prices, certainly on our farm where we've got a variety of enterprises, have never been higher in terms of the world demand for our product. Number three is technology. And I really find it fantastic that the farmers of New Zealand are saying that's our opportunity. And I think in this room already we heard examples earlier. It's about farmers saying, well, we're not just going to sit and just go with the flow and let all these changes that are happening affect us. We're actually going to respond, and we believe technology will help us respond. And so if farmers are thirsty for the technology that'll actually enable them to address, it might be labour issues, and it could be labour-saving devices, it could be things that happen in the shed or wherever it is, it could be Internet of Things, whatever it is, they're thirsty for that technology to take them forward. They see that as a massive opportunity, not a threat. And again, if you go to probably the local schools and say, what do you think about farmers and technology? They'll say, oh, they're a pretty, dyed-in-the-wool breed, and they're not all that adventuresome. My observation is that technology is right, the farmers adopt it immediately. When Fonterra released its first app, there were 6,000 downloads the next day. And people say, oh no, farmers are a bit conservative. Don't think so. If it's fit for purpose and it works, it'll be adopted. So technology was number 3. Skills and knowledge of those associated with the business. So this is also saying, yes, we'll get the technology. We've actually also got to make sure we've got the skills and capability to capture that technology, make it happen, and actually turn those opportunities into something real. So that's not in the business, it's associated. So often it's adopting or attracting the people around you that can actually build that through. Reputation and image came through again, as well in terms of an opportunity, and that's actually how do we get out there and sell ourselves better, profile ourselves. And I follow a few sites on Twitter and Facebook and others, and it's farmers all around the world now are stepping up and getting out and showing people a lot more about what they do and why they do it, and how great it is, how great the view is from their windows. And then there's other things follow through from there. So we've got this strategic uncertainty, but this is a quote that I just want to dwell on a little bit. Michael Bolge is a guy who's a professor at Purdue University, guy I've got a huge amount of respect for. And this quote, to me, sort of put things into perspective. Because what he says, and I'll just read it, strategic uncertainty, which is what we've been talking about, is the sensitivity of the company's value to 1, inappropriate strategic choices, 2, ineffective strategy implementation, and 3, uncertainties in the business climate. So what Michael Bolge is saying is that, yes, you're going to have uncertainties in the business climate, we've just talked about that, but actually the biggest uncertainty is you. Are you going to make the right strategic choice? And having made it, are you then going to effectively implement it? And most strategy is good, implementation is where it's let down. So those 2 aspects of strategy choice and strategy implementation are absolutely in your hands. Obviously, the uncertainty in the business climate is not, but it's actually how you make those choices and how you implement them that's the key to your success going forward. So I just want to focus, I'll come back to uncertainties later, but for now I just want to talk a little bit about strategic choices and that whole implementation side, because what that leads us into is strategic management. So Sean will recognise this table. He might have even been able to regurgitate it for an exam at some period in his past. But one of the things we talk about with the students and is just to be really clear, what do we actually mean by strategic management? So if I go over to the left-hand side, I'm talking about operational management. So this is the focus of excellence. And generally, if you go down to the local pub and you say, who's a good farmer, they'll talk about someone who's a good operational farmer. The crops always go in on time, the animals always look well, everything about that farm just functions, everything's done well. So the focus is on, outcome is excellence, the focus is on the how, it's absolutely the technical aspect of farming. And the power anyone who sits in that role has over you, if you're their boss, is expertise. So if you've got somebody who's a gun, let's say they're the #1 shearer or a really good contract milker or a great fencer or a fantastic tractor driver, and I am looking for one at the moment, then their expertise over you is that they can do the job, they can do it really, really well, they focus on excellence, and that's where they take great pride. That's operational management. We cannot farm without it. And everybody who delivers in that area is worth their weight in gold. The next level up is what we call the tactical management, and these are the middle managers who I think have always pulled the short straw. Doesn't matter what organisation I've been in, if ever there's been a new boss come in, it's always the middle managers who get reorganised. You know, it's the most sort of, it's the part of the business that's actually, I think, least satisfying in a way, because you feel like you haven't got as much control. But these tactical guys, their outcome is consistent results. So they're the people who their budget is put forward or a plan is put forward, and if it's not delivered, they get it in the neck. So when I worked for Wrightson, every month a report would come from head office saying, this is what you said you would do, this is what you've done, explain the difference and tell us how you're getting back on track. That was all, quite simple questions, but every month that was being requested. And in the same way, you might have your bank managers doing that to you, saying, this is the overdraft you said you'd be at, this is where you are at, explain the difference, and tell us how you're going to get back on track. You're the middle managers actually having to produce those consistent results. It might not be your bank manager. It might be your children saying, but you said we were going to go on holiday this year. You said we were going to go to Greece. You said you were going to buy me a new XYZ. Explain the difference. Tell me when you're going to get back on track. So as the middle manager, you have to be delivering these consistent results. It's about the what. Your head, it's about organising. So the middle manager is a person who sets up policies, procedures, ensure the systems are in place, health and safety, any other issue. They're the ones who have to make sure everything's running smoothly. Their power is authority. So that's the one buzz they do get, is that generally they can say to people, well, you are going to do that because I said so. I'm your boss, and I've set up the procedures, and that's how it's supposed to happen. There's obviously a flip side, because then obviously with that becomes all the responsibility that goes with it. But that's a critical role, and for some people, that's where farming stops. They're very good at the operational, very good at the tactical, run a very good ship, and they do the same. They run the same organisation for most of their lives. So I always reckon it takes about 20 years to lose a farm, given that you don't respond to what else is going on in the world. You carry on doing what you've always done. But for people coming, I didn't mean to be negative by that, but people coming to this point are good managers, and they're usually recognised, again, by the local community and the pub and wherever else as being good managers. But I'll give you an example. I was judging a Farmer of the Year competition up in the Taranaki, and visited this one young guy, and he was running an exceptional farm. Everything was in good shape. It was all looking wonderful. He'd got everything down to a fine art in terms of pasture management and animal health and everything. And I said to him, so tell me, 5, 10 years out, what's it going to look like? And he looked at me as though I'd asked him the most stupid question he ever could have thought of. He couldn't see what relevance there was in me asking that question. I'm sure he had a lot of very unfavourable things to say after I'd gone, but for me, he didn't exist in this channel here. He'd come in, he was still working with his father. He actually perhaps hadn't got into the dreaming bit yet, but he had no vision for where that business was going to go. He was just doing what had always been done. Very good tactical, very good operational. The strategic management is about positive change. So someone could farm for 20 years. If there's never been any positive change in all that time, they are not strategic managers. They're tactical, they're operational managers. The strategic manager says, there's a whole lot going on out there, some of those uncertainties we talked about. I'm going to move this business positively in a certain direction. And positive change is the outcome you're endeavouring to achieve. You might not always achieve it, because strategy is incredibly risky, but that's what you're aiming to achieve. Excuse me. You're doing it because of the why. So there was the how and the what, now it's the why. This is all about the heart, it's about dreaming, it's about this is where we believe we need to be, and this is why we want to be there. And the hardest part of the lot is if you're a leader, a strategic leader, the way you have power over others isn't because you can say, well, I think we should be organics, and it's because I said so and we're just going to do it. You actually have to influence people. So the power you have as a strategist is through influence. If you can influence and excite other people with your dream and your thoughts, collectively, especially in a family, it's often a collective dream, then you can actually get strategy to happen. If you can't influence people, you can dream as much as you like, but you'll just be this funny old person sitting over here coming up with wacky ideas, and everyone else will just carry on doing what they've always done. So this is the bit that takes you into strategy. So if you're looking at strategic management, goals drive that. That's your dreams. It has to have a well-defined vision or purpose, goals, and a really key awareness of what you're going to measure, what success looks like. And one thing that I do put this up for pharma audiences in particular, because if you look at the flip side, there's a lot of works come out of Harvard universities around something called the balanced scorecard, where they say the big problem in most corporates is that they only look at the money. And they tend to think, well, if you can't measure it with the money, then the rest of it's almost irrelevant. And they're saying, actually, that's not the case. And most businesses now are saying, as in, we'll go through this a bit for the farming businesses, but essentially the money is the means to the end, or sometimes the end, but it's actually all that other stuff you have to be really clear around, the much, much bigger picture. I think it was Danone a couple of weeks ago said they are no longer, shareholder wealth is no longer their primary objective. It's actually a sustainability objective, because they're saying the shareholder wealth will happen if they get the sustainability objective delivered to first. So there's a lot broader perspective coming through. But in the farming ones, I put this up mainly because production-based goals are so straightforward and what we all enjoy. So you go out and visit a farm, and I always say to my students, if you go out there, you'll get lots and lots on cows and grass and drainage and irrigation and tractors and all the other bits and pieces. But you've got to delve a little bit further, because there's a whole lot of other stuff around people, around environment, around what's happening in finance, and you've got to build that picture broader and broader. So it's not just production, and it's also not just finance. You've got to go further than that. It's about seeing the big picture and identifying those opportunities that were there in that risk assessment. So am I really seeing, out of all that stuff out there that people are dooming and glooming about, because people love to doom and gloom about what's happening in farming, am I really seeing the opportunities, because that's where I'm going to make and take advantage. Excuse me. And what you're ending up with is, for those of you who can see the very bottom, the value-focused strategic leadership. Essentially is what strategic management's all about. And the characteristics, I put that picture up also for those of you that are interested, that's our turnip crop. So when we grow turnips at home now, we put sunflower seed in. And it's a natural, there's something the sunflower exudes that keeps the white butterfly away. It works. Plus, everybody in the neighborhood stops by and picks sunflowers. So you get a lot of people sort of wandering through the farm. But it does work, and the cows eat all the sunflower as well. So it's, they strip graze it. Anyway, just an aside. So in terms of strategic management, it is a continuous process. So one of the things that also people say, well, I'll go off and I'll learn how to be a strategist. I'll go on a course on business planning. And you go away for 2 days and you fill in lots of boxes and you come back saying, okay, I've done my strategic plan. And then you tend to then carry on doing what you've always done. If it's strategic management working, it's continuous. It means you're constantly thinking about what's going on in the world around you and thinking about opportunities and threats that come out of that. It is also very systematic, so it can't just be haphazard dreaming and then making things happen. You've actually got to put a process in place. You've also got to get the right people wrapped around you, not only to believe in that dream, but also to come up with those right decisions. And it is about decisions. So you can't just have a whole lot of strategic thinking. You've got to then make sure that you've made a decision and you actually make it. Normally that means a few $1 million get put on the table, and you're actually then you have a number of sleepless nights to follow to make sure that you've actually made the right decision. You've got to be very clear about the outcomes that you want out of that, how they're going to be accomplished, and what success, how it's measured and evaluated. And that's really a whole other talk, which I'm happy to share with you at some point in the future, but so often we follow the wrong metrics. We end up following ideas of success that are perhaps provided to us by our neighbor, our consultant, the newspaper or whatever else. The right measure, the right metric for your success is what you believe that outcome is going to look like and what it's going to deliver to you and your business. So it can be very specific to your business. Are you, oh, sorry, I thought you were, that's all right. Excuse me. They often talk about strategic management, well, it is talked about as, some people present it as very linear. This diagram suggests it's linear, but the only reason I've put it in here is that the critical part of strategy is that, yes, you've got your vision, you do your analysis, you come up with strategy, you implement it, there's constant feedback, but most importantly, at every point in time, you're over here saying, is this adding value to us as owners, to our customers and our employees? So there's a triple impact in terms of any strategy you put in place. If you're only looking at it from your perspective, not your employees and your customers, then you're far less likely to be successful over time. Last week, or Saturday, I was down at the INSEAD Business School just outside of France, which was quite happy. It coincided with me being here. I could go down and pick up a certificate for a course that I did last year. And there's quite a good quote here from Ludo, who ran the course I was on, saying that the cases of strong value creation in family-owned businesses correspond to owners having a clear and strong longer-term vision for the firm that they own. So that goes back again to having that strategy, having that vision, making sure that that dream is in place, and then that then pulls back through. And they do a huge amount of work with family businesses. I mean, some of the European family businesses are massive, but they have a wonderful emphasis on family as opposed to the corporate structure that we get given a lot, from from America, where it has a very different functionality altogether, whereas the family functionality is very much rooted on the fact you have to have a vision for the firm, and that's part of making sure that you've got that sorted out. It has to be a shared vision and reflect the value set relevant to the business, and we'll cover off on that shortly. One of the most complicated parts of family businesses, of course, is that they are a family. It's not one person. And you will have a value set. You won't just have one person's views. It won't ever often also be one person's dream. And sometimes the dream is somebody who isn't maybe even necessarily the person who's out there having to do the work. I know in our business, I don't tend to do much of the tactical and operational side, but I do come up with a few of the wacky ideas. And so sometimes, it can cause a lot of tension in a family as well. If you hadn't come up with that stupid blinking idea, we wouldn't be up to here and wherever, trying to sort this out. So trying to balance the people who've got some of that, more entrepreneurial approach to life with those who are much more in the tactical level. And a tactical person, you remember they needed to have consistent results, so those guys don't normally like the boat being rocked. They're actually quite happy with the process and procedures they put in place. So someone comes along, and it might be son or daughter comes back from university, or somebody in the family comes up with this great idea. I've just been to New Zealand. I think we should do X, Y, Z. Often it's the person running that ship with a good tactical manager who is the most threatened. And they'll be the ones who push back the most because they're saying, but I've got my processes, I don't need to change. And so you then have to go back to say, well, what is our shared vision? Where do we want this business to be going in the future? And then why then do we need to change? So there's quite a journey involved in that. And the other one is that this everyone waiting for everyone else to make a decision syndrome, which is, again, very common in a family business, versus imagination and discovery. So if you're going to get imagination, discovery going on in your business, you've got to let it in, and you've got to have the discussions. Sometimes they're hard discussions to have, but if you're all sitting there waiting for someone else to make the decision, it won't happen. I'm also on the chair of a large family business where the founder, actually a Brit, he left here way back, went over to New Zealand as a 10-pound pom, and then developed the most amazing farming operation from scratch. It was a $200 million enterprise, multiple farms, all the rest of it, still holding very tight control, and then got ill. And then suddenly it was, well, who's going to make the decisions? We've always had somebody he was the CEO and the chair, basically it was his business. Luckily, he did bring a few independent directors in, and so we were sort of trying to help the family sort of move forward in that space. And now I'm chairing it, and he's got more ill. We're now just trying to say, well, what does this look like beyond him in terms of where the family will go, and the other investors who are also involved. So making sure we try and determine a shared vision is a really critical part of that. It has to be imaginable, feasible, and measurable, as well as important, stretching, and exciting. There's no point jumping out of bed for a vision that actually says, well, we'll just carry on doing what we've always done. It doesn't do much for people. Might do something for the person in that tactical place who likes the fact will do what we've always done because he's got the systems in place, he or she've got the system in place. But for someone who might be coming into the business, the next generation, or someone who actually just wants to connect with this business going forward, it's not a very exciting place. So it is important that you've got some stretch there. And what you're delivering is that value-focused strategic leadership. So I'm going to talk now about this value set. And what I'd like you to do, because it's time you did something, is to read each of these phrases that are going to come up on the board and sit yourself. You might be the farmer. So in this case, this is your head you're thinking about, your values. And for each of the phrases that will come up, just write down on a piece of paper the colour that reflects you. You just choose one. I know it's hard. Normally we do this as a survey and we can get more complex, but in a large group, this is the process. So in this one slide, I'm saying that one's red. Preference for a healthy outdoor farming life. If you feel that's you, you write down red. Or you might think this is you, a chance to be creative and original. Or you might think this is you, you can read it, making maximum income. That's yellow. Sorry, it's got a bit bright. Or this might be you, working with other members of the family. So one of those you'll look at and say, well, okay, I've got a bit of this and a bit of that, but no, that one resonates. That's sort of, I'm comfortable to say I'm a green or I'm a blue or whatever else it is, okay? So I've got a few of these slides, so I'll read them because the yellow is obviously going to be a bit hard to see. And I'll tell you the colour as I read them as well. So you've chosen a colour for the first slide. The next slide, gaining self-respect for doing a worthwhile job, blue. Maintaining good relations with workers, green. Independence, freedom from supervision and to organise time, red. And God, blimey. Expanding the business, yellow. So one of those resonates for you. Just write the colour down. All right. Next one. If I'm going too fast, let me know. Gaining recognition and prestige as a farmer, green. Control in a variety of situations, red. Feeling pride of ownership, blue. Heard a bit of that in the first session. And yellow, making satisfactory income. Safeguarding income for the future, yellow. Continuing the family tradition, green. Purposeful activity, value in hard work. That's my husband, red. Hasn't worked if he hasn't sweated. Exercising special abilities and aptitudes, blue. It is hard sometimes to choose because you sort of feel, I'm a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but just for the exercise, just choose one. Providing congenial working conditions, hours, security, surroundings, yellow. Belonging to the farming community, green. Enjoyment of work tasks, red. Meeting a challenge, achieving an objective, personal growth, blue. So our students do this survey with every farm visit they go to in terms of doing strategic management projects. It's quite a good way of just getting some of these values on the table without having to ask too many awkward questions. Okay, so in the room, do a bit of a tally. How many people would be a dominant yellow? Got a few? Actually, quite a few. All right. How many people are a dominant green? quite so many. Dominant blue, not surprising. And dominant red, a few more. Okay, so I'll give you an example. I was giving this, not this talk, I went through this exercise with a group of ranchers in Texas. So I was in Texas and there was a room of about 450 odd people, and they all were there with their boots and their belt buckles and their hats, and most of them had big moustaches as well. I went through this exercise and went out to the room and said, okay, so how many yellows in the room? And there was one guy put his hand up. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And then it turned out he was what they call a dude rancher. He was an accountant who owned a ranch, so he didn't count for them. But interestingly, if you read any of the American farm management literature, they'll tell you profits #1, profits what everybody, that's the absolute focus. There was only one that basically was the yellow. And then we went through the other colors. But I'll come back to ask you, leave that thought, we'll come back to it, because I'm going to ask you what you think those ranchers will have chosen, dominant color, when we come back to the further on down the track. Because what I want you to do now, somewhere in your business, you have a partner. It might be a mother or a father, or a wife or a husband, or a brother or a sister, or an uncle or whatever, or somebody who's not actually related. It could be an equity partnership like we've got in our business. So I want you now to put yourself into the shoes of that person, and we're going to go through the same exercise. I'll go a bit faster this time. Okay, so you're now, someone at the back of the room mentioned the name for this partner. I can't remember. Anyway, this is this person who actually is as critical to your business going forward as you are. All right? So, preference for a healthy outdoor farming life, chance to be creative and original, making maximum income, working with other members of the family. What do you think they would choose? Just write down a color. And if you're sitting next to that person right now, it's okay to perhaps cover up your page a bit so they can't see what you're putting down. Gaining self-respect for doing a worthwhile job, blue. Maintaining good relations with workers, green. Independence, freedom from supervision and to organize time, red. And expanding the business, yellow. Gaining recognition or prestige as a farmer, green. Control in a variety of situations, red. Feeling pride of ownership, blue. Making satisfactory income, yellow. Safeguarding income for the future, yellow. Continuing the family tradition, green. Purposeful activity, value and hard work, red. Exercising special abilities and aptitudes, blue. And the last one, I think. Yes. Providing congenial working conditions, hours, security, surroundings, yellow. Belonging to the farming community, green. Enjoyment of work tasks, red. Meeting a challenge, achieving an objective, personal growth, blue. Okay, so tally up the scores. How many in the room is the person you were being got the same colour as you? There's a few. So everybody else, a different colour? Okay, so there's your diversity of your value set. Your business has to progress with both colour sets being taken into account. So you might have one who's green and one who's yellow. one who's very strong on community and on the relationships with the staff and making sure that the people side of the business is really strong, the family side's really strong, and the yellow, it's all about just show me the money. And so you've got those two people probably sleeping in the same bed, and they're certainly making decisions around the future of that business going forward. So how to build that into a shared vision is really challenging. I had a student who, for her master's, she went out and spent time, she worked with 10 different dairy farming families and went through this exercise and more, really delving into it all. And she came back to me once and she said, you know, I've got this amazing ability to make grown men cry. Because every time she'd get, they'd get to these sorts of discussions around the table, they're the hardest discussions the families ever go through. And generally someone gets pretty emotional about it. I never knew that's what you wanted. Because actually, funnily enough, even though you sleep with the same person, you don't always talk about such things. You just get on with life. But this exercise is a very simple exercise, and it enables you to get these differences out on the table so you can talk about them in a hopefully not too emotional way, because you can then actually go forward and come up with what you believe your shared vision is. So let's think about who these different groups are. We start with the yellow. This is the business values. Farming is viewed as a means of obtaining income and security with pleasant working conditions. So these guys will still be focused on things like health and safety and making sure everything's done right and everyone's, good wages are paid. We heard about that before. But at the same time, it's about making sure that, every dollar is a prisoner. You're making sure that you're only spending as you should. You're making that money. You're making those investments. It's about building that wealth going forward. The social values, the green, farming is undertaken for the sake of interpersonal relationships and work. There are people who go to work who do it because they genuinely enjoy being with people, working with people. They get incredibly lonely if they're by themselves. You send them off to do a job somewhere out the back and they just suffer, but send 2 of them off to do the job and they love it. It's all about, working with others, and they really get a huge part, a lot of benefit out of doing that. And if you're an owner, then it's also about the buzz that you get from actually working with people, building people through, and we, heard a lot about that earlier on, making sure that, that everyone actually is, and not only in the farm, but also in the community, there's a very broad connection. And the family is incredibly important to people with the green value set. The red value set is very typical of New Zealand farmers. Farming is valued as an activity in its own right. So this is, I'm independent, I'll do it because I do it, and I do it because it's, it's hard work's great, and it's what I'm about, and this is, really, I'm a farmer and this is what I like doing. And it's an activity that I do because it's something that is part of who I am, but more importantly, it's part of the way I express myself in my day-to-day living. So that's, for many New Zealand farmers, they come through in that red area. And the blue is an interesting one. That we call it expressive values, but farming is a means of self-expression or personal fulfillment. And this is often where you'll get a lot of creativity coming into farmers. And if you've got creative people who are in this blue space, you kill them by giving them monotony and telling them that we don't want change, we don't want to do anything different, we're just doing it as we've always done. Because these people thrive on self-expression and personal fulfillment. And there were a lot of blues in the audience. So these are the guys who are saying, actually, I know I can make a difference. I know I can be imaginative here. I can find a way. I can, just let me delve forward and build this business in a creative way. So who do you think the Texas, well, not just these ranchers were from Canada, Mexico, right throughout America. Which group do you think they would have been part of? Has anyone worked on cattle ranches in the States? Yeah, I had a year working there. I've still got my boots. I never grew the moustache. But I've got the belt. My son wears it now. I've got the boots and the hat. They're all gathering. I think the moths are tucking them to them now. But what colour do you think those ranchers would be? Anyone want to? Wasn't red. Wasn't green. And it wasn't yellow, remember, because there was only one dude rancher there. They were blue. Because blue is a means of self-expression. They get out of bed in the morning and they put on their jeans and they pull on their boots and they do up that belt buckle and they put on their hat. I'm a cowboy. You know, that's who they are. And if you put them into an environment where they're not being a cowboy and you're saying, look, you can make just as much money by running your farm this way, but actually you no longer need to wear the boot and hats and be a cowboy, you'll kill that business. So it's about being true to what your value set is. For them, self-expression is a really critical part of who they are and why they do what they do in the morning. And so for them going forward, yes, the cattle ranch, I mean, I visited some of the cattle ranches I worked on, and in those days when I worked there, every morning the first thing we did was saddle up a horse, and all the work was done on horseback. It was amazing. And this time I went back, you know, what was it, 30, 40 years later, they're driving around on four-wheel motorbikes now, which completely, for me, changed it. But those guys are now running cattle ranches very differently to what they were, but they're still wearing their boots and their hats and all the rest of it. So part of it's still about what are we? We're cattle ranchers, we're taking this business forward. How you change that business has to reflect the value set that sits behind it. Because if you make a change to your business and it contravenes the value set that's fundamental to the people embedded in that business, you're going to struggle to get it successful. So think about that going forward, and if you want that survey, I can give it to Sean actually. It's quite it's a nice little survey to run if you're doing it. You might want to do it with a family group, and then what we do is put it on a spider graph so you can actually visually see, you know, who is vastly different from others in what areas, and then that can then be the conversation around coffee. So just quickly before I leave these values, those value sets were actually, I took them out of a book called The Family Farm Business, written by Ruth Gasson and Andrew Errington. So Ruth was at Y College, Andrew was as well at the time, then he went to Seal Hayne. It was written back in the 60s. So the fundamental value set for us as farmers hasn't changed. I could use buzzword, new words there now, but those terms actually were still relevant. And I've used it on a lot of audiences all around the world, and it just helps, you know, helps you connect with what it is that you believe in and what therefore you want to do going forward. So the next test is, once you've done this value set, you then say, okay, well, so how can I capture that? We've sat around the kitchen table and we've probably gone beyond coffee now, we're into the whiskey or whatever, because the day's got long and we still haven't resolved where, you know, what we're really all about. But at some point, you've got to pull it into a statement. So I'll share a couple of, here's one of a guy who farms in the Manawatu, not far from me. I've taken the students there a couple of times and had some postgrads working with this farmer. He was never going to be a farmer. He actually went off and trained as an engineer, but his oldest brother, died in a light plane accident. So you can see here that succession is a key part of this business. He's 7th generation. So he said, well, actually, I didn't, you know, that once my brother had gone, I was the farmer. I mean, that was just the norm. But he still believes in it so strongly, it's part of his vision statement. So whether you call these vision statements, statements of strategic purpose, whatever, it doesn't matter. You can just call it where we're going or who we are. You don't have to use buzzwords. But in here, he's got the pursuit of excellence and growth. So this business is going to be good. He wants to grow it sustainably. He's providing for diversification, and he has a number of operations on his business. Succession, so that matters. It's part of what the family's all about. He's 7th generation, and his children are part of the next. And the interesting one at the end is a continuously improving standard of living for all stakeholders in the business. So this guy has a really strong sort of what I call a value chain approach to his business. So he says, yes, here we are, but we need to make sure that the people who we buy from and the people we sell to do well out of us doing well. So it's about having excellent relationships and business relationships with the people you're buying from and the people you're selling to. And he believes in it so strongly, he puts it in his vision statement. So this actually reminds them, and anyone who works for them, that actually, no, we're not sitting in this island all by ourselves. If we're not doing the right thing by those who we buy from and sell to, we're actually not delivering to what we believe matters in life going forward. So they have captured a number of things coming out of obviously all the different values that were in that business, the value sets that are sitting in that business. Here's another one. Tell me what colour you think the dominant value set is behind this business. Can you all read it? Have a farm business that's growing, is financially profitable, environmentally sustainable, while enabling us to maintain our lifestyle, enjoy time with our children and friends, and continue our involvement in the community. Yeah, they're a dominant green. So for this family, or for this business, the green probably would have been more than just one person sitting around that table, or one person who was particularly forceful, I'm not too sure. But either way, this is what they stand for. This is what they get out of bed in the morning to deliver to. So if you did anything with this business that might suggest that, oh, we've got there's this new enterprise or this new way of doing things, it's fantastic. But it does mean actually that you're now, 7 days a week, there's a requirement for somebody to be, turning knobs or switching something or having to do whatever. And they'll say, but hang on a minute, what about this bit here about community, going to the children's sports on the weekend, all those sorts of things. So for that family, they would be not choosing some of the business changes that could impact on their ability to do community and family and have that time to do that. Does anyone want to share with us any of their statements they might have? And I'm sure, I know some of you out there have got some, because we're just even talking with some of the groups earlier on, there was some, or rather than share your statement, having looked at your statement or thought about what your whole sort of purpose is, what colour you believe that dominates. Or perhaps have a brief discussion with people around your table. Don't share it with a bigger group. But if there's anyone around your table that maybe already has a vision, a strategic purpose, something like that, just have a brief discussion, and I'll have a drink of water. So I'll just share this with you. This is our farming business. We have a range of enterprises: sheep, beef, deer, and dairy, obviously, and forestry. We're just nestled into the Ruahine Ranges there. We started the business from scratch about 30-something years ago, and built it through multiple equity partnerships. So we've got a raft of things going on there, but this sort of just basically picks up the key aspects about our business. One of the things in our business in terms of diversity is that we've got a range of our income way back at the early days. The pink was wool, believe it or not, back in 1988. It was nearly 80% of our, or a big chunk, wool and sheep were 80-something% of our income. And our partners, we've got equity partners who are very counter-cyclical, and at that time wool was doing incredibly well. We said we should buy some more sheep, and they said no, we need to actually invest in something else. We're far too vulnerable. And so that's when we bought the first dairy farm, and that's the black coming through. And when we got to about this point down here, and dairying was just humming, they said it's time we thought about some other investments. So we invested in some finishing farm. We now finish all our dairy male calves. So the yellow is beef, and we're now back in balance again, so that we're sort of half dairy. We've got sheep, beef, still some deer. We only keep the deer really because it's such good eating. And other than that, we probably wouldn't. And our son, middle son, who is coming farming, he loves his deer. But just briefly, the diversity that has existed in our business, that's the gross margin over the time. The different enterprises, so while some are up, some are down, sometimes they're all down, which is not so good, and sometimes you try to balance it out, but the blue bars are actually the operating profit per hectare. So even with trying to balance it out, you still get volatility that goes through there. And then I'm going to share this one with you just to, again, I talked about the metrics of strategy. So over that time period, 30-odd years, the return on assets, which is the farming side of the business, has delivered 4.4% and a standard deviation of 2.4, so that's down 2 up to 6. But when you add in the property business, to give us what we call the total ROA, which is the blue line, the return on asset goes up to 12%. The standard deviation is much broader. And then when you look at total return on equity after tax, so that's when you bring in the impact of debt, take out the tax deductibility of that side of things, it ends up over that whole time period of a 12.3% return, but a standard deviation of 12.2. So the breadth of the volatility that sat around that business through all that time, despite the diversity, has been quite amazing. But the investors who joined us back in 87, 88 are still with us. They now bring their children to our AGMs, because we thought they'd leave sort of after about 5 or 6 years, but they're now still there because that return they don't mind, and they actually manage the volatility. So they look through, they have a bigger picture when it comes to volatility. So let's go back to this strategic uncertainty, the uncertainties in the business climate. And I'm not going to dwell on this aspect. I'm going to skip over the bit I was going to do around scenarios, because I think that's something that probably needs a bit more time, and you can actually get the report if you need it. But the reason we, as researchers, went into scenario analysis is that with the best will in the world, our perceptions are full of what they call cognitive biases. So we tend to believe futures, or we tend to believe people if they're reinforcing what we already sort of think. We tend to sort of, and that's called confirmation bias. Hindsight bias, you know, well, it's sort of happened in the past, it'll happen again. Anchoring is when you grab a particular thing and say, I'll take that bit of information because that helps reinforce stuff, but I'll ignore other stuff over here. And that tunnel vision, there's also one called herd bias, which is where we all sort of do the same thing. There's a lot of that, and it actually prevents us from seeing the future. So if we're trying to determine strategy, our biggest problem is actually the cognitive biases that sit in our own heads, or even sit in our own industries. So in the scenario analysis, we got this technique. It's one that Shell developed a long time ago, and we got a group of industry people to work through with us, 69 stakeholders. We had 3 meetings over 6 months, and we pulled through a variety of different strategies for the future. Technology was the pivotal balancing factor. Again, technology comes through as the thing that people believe is going to make a difference irrespective of the future. And I'm not just saying that as someone who's been has a science background and believes in technology, but this is coming from the people in the group. There's none of my own bias coming into that. And then we pulled up 4 scenarios. The base one, which is what the industry is currently saying is going to happen. The other 3, there was a scenario called the consumer is king, and that was actually about the whole sort of consumer driving the whole future of the food industry, but taken to its extreme. So in a scenario, you would take one thing and take it to its extreme. The bottom one, regulation rules, is basically taking that whole sort of government telling us what we need to do about everything taken to an extreme. And then the one right on the far side, government dictate political chaos and shrinking markets. That was actually taking, at that time, some fairly small soft signals around sort of dissonance in the world and taking it to an extreme. And unfortunately, the box that we seem to have ticked mostly is in scenario 2 over the last year or two with some of what's been going on. But then within each scenario, we then mapped it out and said, okay, if that extreme happens, what does it look like? What would farming look like to survive in those situations? And I've now got a master's student who's actually taking one of the Massey farms and saying, so let's look at modelling what that farm would look like in any one of these scenarios out into the future. But I'm going to flick over the detail on those because it takes a lot of thought to work through those. And I did want to just talk about resilience briefly, because that is actually the topic of my conversation, well, of my talk, isn't it? In terms of the resilience, it is all about you. You're the people who determine that resilience. If you're defining resilience, there are a number of definitions buzzing around, and some people seem to look things up out of Wikipedia and then say they know all about resilience, which is a bit frustrating because essentially in resilience you've got change happening down here, and as change gets more extreme, you have to totally transform your business. But down at the bottom end, which is what we're in most of the time, it's about buffer capacity, what we call bounce without breaking. So this is, the world is changing around me, but not so much I have to change fundamentally. And that's norm business. That's just the graphs I was showing you before around what happens in the world. Adaptive capacity is when you say, the world has changed around such that I now need to change. There's things we need to do differently in our business because the world has changed, and therefore I need the skills to develop that adaptive capacity. And we'll talk about that more for those who join the group later on. And then the further one is when we say, actually, fundamentally, things have changed so far that we've been pushed, the farming system's been pushed beyond what it can tolerate. We need to totally change. And that might be going from sheep and beef to dairy, or now it might be going from dairy back to sheep and beef, or whatever. There's things going on that means your business is fundamentally going to change. So those are the 3 levels of resilience. We did some work around, mostly in the buffer capacity one, because this was using our dairy-based data. We tried to look at some metrics, try to identify how you could measure resilience, because resilience is what they call an emerging property. You don't actually know you're resilient till after the event. So it's actually really hard to, people will say, well, I can measure your resilience. No, they can't. I mean, it actually is how you've coped that says whether you've been resilient or not. And so we looked at many years of data, and this is just for those of you that do follow the argument in the dairy exporters about high input, low input systems. There is no statistical difference between the systems in terms of profitability if you measure it with the return on assets or cost per kilogram of dry matter. It's either the numerator or the denominator that wins the argument, and I wish the New Zealand dairy industry would just stop going on about it, because it's actually it's the excellence of the farmer that determines the system that works best. The other thing that was really interesting, we looked at those farmers who managed downside and upside risk best. None of the farmers who best captured upside risk were in the group who best mitigated downside risk when the market went against them. And that was a worry. So we had guys who were really good at capturing the upside when the prices went with them. They were not the same people who managed to keep the business together when prices went against them. But the one metric that was common to the better of the groups always was this one called operating profit margin. I'll come back to that one shortly. So then we analysed them in quite a lot of depth in terms of trying to define that emerging property, and the one that came through was the operating profit per hectare. And operating profit margin, definitely not the operating profit per hectare. Just without a pointer, I'll just stand and try not to fall off the stage. These are the guys that were the lower, so we did come up with a resilience index. These are the guys with a lower index, and if their operating profit margin, which is basically your business earns $1 or £1, and it's how much of that is still sitting in your back pocket after all your operating expenses have gone. What is the percentage? So in these guys, it was 22% of that money was still sitting there. The guys in the resilient group, it was 40, nearly double. So they had, for every pound, they had 40p versus 22 for the lower resilient. The higher resilient guys also had double the return on asset. They had operating expenses that were less, both per hectare and per kilogram milk solid. They had return on equity that was 6 times the group on this side. But statistically, the one metric that actually determined difference was operating profit per margin. And that's about people who can not only, it's not just about cost control, it's actually about spending to earn. So it's the people who actually flexed with milk price and actually managed to keep that, so they had cost control, but they were also focused on revenue generation, and it's the combination of the two that comes through in that metric. So be careful if you only look at cost, because sometimes you're missing the opportunity that's come around the corner with pricing. In terms of the risk management strategies that the farmers are adopting, the one that is number one on the farmers' list of a number of strategies we suggested to them was actually managing debt. Now, our farmers' average debt now, I think, in New Zealand dairy farmers is about 50%. And interestingly, we've done the same survey since 1996, so we've done it about 3 or 4 times. And way back, one of the policies, one of the risk management strategies was keeping debt low. That's gone as a strategy. You can see that in the numbers. But what it's been replaced by is managing debt. And so I've got a PhD student now who's just delving into exactly what does that mean. What does managing debt mean in terms of the farmers that he's surveyed and the work that he's done? So some of it's around, interest-only loans. Some of it's about keeping flexibility, about repaying, fixing, floating, all sorts of different things that he's looking into. The top 2 strategies actually are all about liquidity, because managing debt also says I'll pay it when I'm ready to or when I can. And planning of capital spending says I'll do capital when I can as well. So it's actually about making sure that the cash is still in the business. What really fascinated me was that for these farmers, their risk management strategies, if you look, we've got practical planning steps, having a strategic purpose, having flexibility, monitoring, and then the SWOT analysis at the bottom. So at least half of the top strategies are actually all about being a better strategic manager. which goes back to what we talked about before around, you know, having your strategic purpose, your reason for being, and then ensuring that you actually plan and monitor along the way was, for them, their key risk management strategies. I think I'll stop there because after that I was going to go into some stuff that I'm going to share with the group later on. All right?
Thank you for that, Nicola. I'll now pass it out to the floor for any questions that there may be out there. I'll kick off with one. Going back to the management types between your tactical and strategic managers, what sort of steps can people undertake to move from being a tactical manager into a strategic manager?
Okay. Well, I talked about you going off on a course, doing a 2-day course on business planning and then being told or thinking that you're then a strategic manager. So, and I was possibly a little bit facetious about it, but I do struggle a little bit with people thinking that they are therefore a strategic manager because they've done the course. The courses that you can go on are very good in terms of helping you to understand process. But there's actually 2 aspects of strategic management. There's strategic planning and there's strategic thinking. They're actually using 2 different sides of the brain. So the strategic planning is the bit you'll learn on the course, you know, how to define your objectives or how to make sure that you get your vision pulled together and you've identified your values and you've got, you know, you've ticked those boxes, you're clear about what that is. But don't get too hung up on that because some courses take you right down to, well, have you got an action plan and have you got all this stuff? I mean, the world can change tomorrow, as we know, so you've got to just make sure you've got some flexibility sitting in there, but still do it. But then over here is the strategic thinker. And I'll cover, that came up very strongly in what is a resilient farmer, which I'll cover in the group later on. Because the strategic thinker is somebody who actually never stops. They have an antennae, and there was a guy once I was judging in a Farmer of the Year competition, and I said to his wife, you know, I don't think he probably ever switches that antennae off. And she said, no, he doesn't. Wherever they are, this guy is just seeing opportunities. Just find it, he'll be at a golf club and he'll talk to someone about something, or he'll be at a school function and he'll start talking to someone about something, and then he'll be somewhere, I don't know, somewhere quite totally separate from farming, and he'll still be connecting to what's going on and thinking about what that might do or how he could bring that into his farm. And that's the strategic thinker, that's that creative side. And a lot of you with the blue colour, I mean, you're into that creative space. And that means that you are constantly, if you're a strategic thinker, you're constantly looking at what those options are. And it's when you bring the strategic thinker and the strategic planning together is when you're then starting to move down the strategic management path. So often, you know, it's not a lone thing either. You need to do it with others because strategy is about the whole business. It's not just about one person. So probably one way would be to actually make sure that you're involving others in the journey. But like-minded souls, not people like that poor young guy in Taranaki who couldn't understand why I actually was interested in where he was going to be in 5 years' time. You know, it's actually about people who are interested and bring them into the journey and the discussion.
Yes, in front here.
Thank you for your presentation. With all the different colours, different personalities, what do you do when you've got more than 2 in the family? How do you actually form these goals and a plan, especially when it goes through different generations with different priorities?
It's very common to have more than 2. And that's why I didn't show you, but you can map them out in a spider graph, so it actually is clearer to see where the differences are, because what you might find, you might say there's 4 or 5 people, and once you do the spider graph, you realise that actually 3 out of the 5 actually are pretty similar in these 3 areas and only differ there, and others are similar there and only differ there. So the spider graph enables you then to just focus on the points of difference. You don't have to focus on where you're similar. And that way it limits the conversation then to say, okay, well, how do we tackle this? Because, you know, just because someone says community and family matter and someone else is saying, well, really, that's really low on my radar because, you know, let's say they're someone who isn't married, is never going to marry, is not interested for whatever reason. And so, but you still have to accommodate. So it's about building the respect within the group to say, well, yes, I know that your values, you know, that you have feel strongly about that. I don't, but I feel strongly about this, and let's make sure that our respective energies are geared accordingly, but also let's make sure that the business going forward doesn't forget that that matters to you and that matters to me, because otherwise you'll disenfranchise someone, and they'll then start, you know, creating, and a family, disenfranchised family is not a pretty place to be. So just trying to keep those differences together. And sometimes it means funny, you know, it might mean even setting up a different business. It could be that there's somebody comes in. I know actually in that Ruth Gasson book, it talks about the worst job that you can, or not the worst job, the most difficult job that anyone can go into is to become a daughter-in-law in a family business. Because they arrive, and what's their function? Well, their function is to breed replacements. But actually, they don't want to just have that as their function because they have a lot more to offer. So how do they find their place in the business? You know, what is their role going to be? And the businesses that can accommodate, and often they'll have a totally different value set. You know, differences attract. So, you know, they're coming into a family where they all sit around and, you know, one person raises an eyebrow and everyone else knows what that means. And they're sitting there thinking, well, I don't know a clue what that person's talking about. But finding something that that person can then do, and you go into some family businesses where the outsider, whether it be a daughter or a son-in-law, have come in, they often can create something very new and different for that business that takes it into a place it's never thought of being in. So you capture the difference and turn it into a positive, and then this business can actually move forward really well. It's not easy to do, though. Yeah.
Just a comment about the different colours. Surely the different colours does reflect on what stage of your career you're at. I mean, I would imagine that the yellows would be more the younger people, and as you go through, you'll go through different stages and different colours.
Well, that's the interesting thing, is that they actually don't tend to change a lot. Because, yes, there are stages in your life where you need money more than other stages, but the fundamentals of why you get up out of bed in the morning and do what you do, and the reason why you actually are attracted to the business in the first place doesn't tend to change over time. You might have to adapt. I mean, people who really don't do money, you know, I've known a lot of farming folk in this space. You know, they really, you know, there's some guys I know who've developed most amazing business, but actually they've never yet focused that much on their balance sheet because they sort of left that to someone else to do. And then things get tight. Well, actually, they have to. So sometimes you just have to go into the spaces that aren't perhaps your comfort. And yes, you'll get to the end of a day in the office and think, you know, right, tomorrow I'm going to go and do what I really enjoy. So there'll be things that you won't enjoy so much, but there are sometimes you have to put focus into an area that you might not have otherwise. But fundamentally, what you know you enjoy comes through in the colours. And so that's the bit that you don't want to lose touch of altogether. So yes, you change as you evolve, but your fundamental values don't tend to change a lot. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that generally speaking, New Zealand farmers do not want their debt to be more than 50%. What was that 50% off? Okay.
No, sorry, I didn't. Their current debt is 50%. So some are a lot more, that's the average. So the current average debt to asset ratio, so that's the term loan to the fixed assets, is currently 50%. It used to, when I first started as a farm consultant, the sheep and beef boys used to sit around 10 and the dairy ones around 15 to 20. And then dairy with the upswing in prices and land and all the rest of it, that's gone closer to, it's now average of 50. So we have some farmers who are in what I call very scary zone, up around the 70, and others who are less, obviously, but the average has gone to 50. The industry is definitely now saying that's too high, and so there's quite a push, and from the bankers as well, they're now saying they won't do interest-only loans. They're forcing people to do it INP, interest and principal, which I think is shocking from a risk management point of view, because you should only pay back when you've got the cash, not because the bank wants it. So the push is to actually get it back to a slightly better place, because when you do get a $3.90 a year and you're on 70% debt, you're looking very sick. And some people pull through that, but it's not a pleasant experience. And what some of the ones who are more corporate or larger farms with a lot of staff have now found that actually in the old days, you know, you could flex a bit. The family just didn't go on that family holiday, and you just, you know, you tighten your belt buckle up and you manage through, and actually that's quite hard to do. A lot of the costs have become quite fixed in the way things are. But what we have found in the way farmers manage the ups and downs, and I will just share that with you briefly, because that operating profit margin says that farmers flex. And I assume, therefore, that they flexed in terms of their spending on things like feed and stuff like that, chasing milk price up or down and just that side of it. But when we've gone through and done the numbers, what we've found is that consistently the guys who do well over the whole period tend to be in a farming system that's about the middle, so they can go either, they can go more intensive, less intensive. But when the bad time comes, the things they cut out of are things like repairs and maintenance, vehicle expenses, you know, a variety of things there that, you know, they just put to one side, and then when the milk price goes back up again, they come back up again. So they get told off by the industry that says you shouldn't be spending this money now, you've got a higher milk price. But they're doing exactly the right thing. They've just put stuff to one side, and then they're coming back in when the milk price is better and catching up on some of the stuff that needs doing. But they are cash managers. They absolutely manage that cash up and down over time. That's coming through as a really key observation.